Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 409 for December 30th, 2023. So first of all, I hope you're all having a wonderful holiday season. I hope I am too, because I'm recording this well ahead of time so I could take some time off. So New Year's is coming up, and that means a few things. First of all, I'm going to be sending out my annual listener survey. Look for more information about that, but I would love to get your feedback. I usually do some sort of promotion around that, maybe a random drawing for a free copy of my book. So stay tuned for more information about that coming up soon. Also, I usually do some sort of a New Year's resolutions show. May not do it right away. Well, I'll get to it at some point. Probably be one of my tips of the week coming up soon. But today I've got another one of my best of episodes, but this is different than the last one. This is actually some really cool snippets from my bonus podcast, which normally is only available to my patrons. So basically, every time I do an interview, I keep my guests on for another 15, 20 minutes, sometimes longer, and ask just some more questions. And they're sometimes related to the topic we discussed, maybe more tangential, maybe more technical. Other times it's more about their background or something else that they're interested in. And so I've got another kind of sample platter for you today of some examples of what some of this bonus content is like. These are just in chronological order. I've got links in the show notes to all the original interviews that they were paired with. If for some reason you missed those and this bonus content makes you want to go back and maybe check out that original interview. But also, FYI, if you become a patron, you'll have access to all this bonus podcast material going all the way back. If you come in at a higher level, you'll also get access to my podcast that I call Merlin's Musings that is more technical usually in nature. And I don't have any good snippets here. Most of those were full topics that ran, 20 to 30 minutes. And so it's kind of hard just to take a little snippet out of that. So today I've just got some little bits and pieces of bonus Q&A that I did with my interview guests over the last year. And just FYI, I do tell all my guests that I may excerpt some of these bonus patron-only podcasts for public consumption later, like I'm doing here. Sometimes I will reach out to the guest just to verify this if I think there's a snippet that might be controversial, as I did for the first snippet you're about to hear. So I guess with that as a teaser, let's check out some of the best clips from my normally patron-only bonus podcast. All right, let's start off with a really good one. This is a little bit of the bonus content from episode 358, where I talked with Micah Lee, who used to work at The Intercept, and was there back when the Snowden documents were released and was privy to those documents. And this wasn't the topic that we were talking about, but since I was talking to him for the bonus content for my patrons, I had to ask him some questions about the Snowden documents and what Edward Snowden did and get his opinion on it from a journalistic perspective. So yeah, let's kick things off right with a bonus snippet about Edward Snowden from my discussion with Micah Lee. I've got to ask, what is your take on the Snowden revelations from a journalistic standpoint? And I don't want to get you in trouble because I know you know Laura and I know you know Glenn. And you were around for the stuff when it happened. But looking back, as a postmortem or, kind of thinking about how those things were handled, they got a lot of blowback for this. And a lot of people said, a lot of people, certainly in the intelligence community and law enforcement community and FBI and such, were saying, this is, again, sources and methods. You're exposing us. This is very damaging to our ability to collect information in the future. From everything I've seen, it looks like they kind of did it right from a journalistic standpoint. Edward gave it to the journalists and then deleted it, from my understanding. So he no longer had it. He gave it to people he trusted, as you were saying in the interview. Find people, journalists that you trust based on work they've done in the past. And he kind of washed his hands of it and said, look, I want to divorce myself from deciding what gets released, but I think this is important. You guys do your journalism magic on it and decide what you think is in the public interest and keep everything else to the best, as you can, secret. So we don't compromise security. That's my take on what I've seen it, but I'm really interested to see what you think about this.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was really smart for Edward Snowden to do what he did, where he gave it to journalists and then deleted it, and he took the decision of what to make public and what not to make public out of his hands. I spent many years doing reporting on the Snowden documents, so I've spent a lot of time looking through that data, and I definitely agree it shouldn't all be public. If it was all dumped on the internet, I think that there's a lot of a lot of it's very difficult to understand and out of context and requires a lot of research to even really understand what it's talking about. But yeah, a lot of it would just be a massive violation of privacy, of people in the intelligence community, but also of people that they're spying on, and also a lot of stuff that's really not that in the public interest, I think. But a lot of it was massive, huge, like world-shattering revelations, and so I think that like, yeah, we're all much better off knowing that all of the big, massive internet pipelines across the United States and several around the world, all that data is getting spied on and brought into like systems like XKeyscore to be able to search for keywords, right? Like the fact that we all know that is really important. And I think it's important for, like I was saying earlier, we're a lot more secure now because, you know, we have HTTPS everywhere that like prevents a whole lot of this type of spying from working.
Right.
But also, it's not just the NSA and the US government. It's governments around the world. Like, basically, like, the internet was really, really, really insecure, and all of the powerful governments can just spy on everybody. And now, you know, nothing's really changed in terms of the NSA spy. The NSA is still spying on the whole internet. They're still, like, I'm sure they're doing whatever they can to collect all of the phone records of Americans and of everybody else. And they're doing, and I mean, I don't know, like, we haven't had a big NSA leak in a while, but like I imagine that it's even worse now. But also their job is a lot harder than it used to be.
Right.
And also there's a lot of other governments that are doing the same thing.
Where does this data now exist? The Snowden documents, who still has a full copy of all of that data?
So this is a good question. I'm not totally sure the answer. I know that when The Intercept decided that to stop publishing stuff based on it, I can't go into details, but we no longer have a copy of it.
Okay.
So a lot of different newsrooms had access to at least a big chunk of the Snowden archive. So like The Guardian, Der Spiegel, ProPublica, New York Times, and I really don't know the status of their copies. I do know that like all of these organizations kind of decided to stop reporting on the Snowden archive, like years before The Intercept did. They might still have them, but basically like part of reporting on the Snowden archive was like everyone had to agree to very strong security. And so that means like only storing it on air-gapped computers, only and like, you know, using disk encryption and you know, physically securing the air-gapped computers that have a copy of it and like things like that. And so I really don't know. This is just speculating, but like, let's say that, you know, the New York Times still has a copy of it. You know, it might be locked in a safe in their building or something, but like if it's on an encrypted hard drive and whoever back like 7 years ago had access to it, like if they haven't typed in that passphrase in 7 years, do you think they still remember it? I think that those are the issues that probably the Snowden archive has. But also, I don't know, like it's hard to know for sure, but a handful of trusted people had access to it, so I no longer do.
Do we know, was the government ever given a copy of that data, or did they have to guess at what they think he took? To this point, do they know what all was leaked?
I don't think that anybody ever gave the government a copy of the Snowden archive. I mean, I know that, you know, when The Intercept was reporting on it, we would, before we did a big report where we're planning on publishing like a set of documents, we would contact the NSA press office and say, hey, we're planning on publishing these documents. Can you give us comment? And also, can you, like I was talking about earlier, like if there's something that we don't know that might like cause harm if we publish these, tell us. That we never actually didn't publish a document because of anything that they said. So we would give them individual documents that we're planning on publishing, but definitely not the whole archive. So I don't know if they know everything. But one thing that's kind of funny, actually, is that the NSA press office would insist that we just email them the documents, and we're like only accessing them on air-gapped computers. And we're like, so we're supposed to like go jump through all of these. And we were like, you know, when we're copying data from computer to computer, we didn't even use USB sticks. We like burnt them to CDs and then shredded the CDs and stuff. So we would be like, okay, so you want us to like copy this to just like my Mac and then just like open up Gmail and attach it? And eventually we actually got them to make a PGP key. But
that's funny.
Yeah. But yeah, so we just gave them individual documents, but that's it.
So can I assume that by the fact that you guys eventually stopped reporting on it and deleted the data, that you think that the journalistic value of the things that had yet to be reported or was left in the data set was was not worth it? Or what can we draw from the fact that you guys are no longer in possession of the data and that we're no longer getting revelations? Is that data just stale at this point and we've all moved past it? So it's got a half-life that is expired kind of thing. What can we infer from that?
I mean, there's stuff that I don't really want to get into related to that, but I do think that, like, at this point, I think that it's most valuable as history. You know, like, this is the history, the early 21st century, like, U.S. surveillance state, and like Five Eyes. Like, this is how surveillance worked at the beginning of the turn of the century.
Sure, yeah.
And and I feel like that's really valuable from a historical perspective. And it would really be great, actually, if some, like, academics or something were able to, like, really, really, really dive in and then, like, write a detailed book or something.
Yeah.
But it's not very valuable for, like, you know, news anymore, I think. Like it's not the type of thing that like, we were publishing it, like, all, like, the latest data in the Snowden archive was from, like, 2012, and we were still publishing stuff by, like, 2017 or something, and even at that point, it was really old news. It was like, oh, another thing that happened, you know, a long time ago. And so, but I mean, I think it has a lot of historical value.
Yeah, I can almost see this being like the time capsule thing. What was it? The Warren Commission report was supposed to be, the data for the Warren Commission report was supposed to be held for 50 years or something after his death before it was released. And when that 50-year came up, I was expecting, like, some massive revelations and Oliver Stone to do another movie or something based on that. And it was kind of fizzled. But yeah, I think it would be interesting if there was a time capsule aspect to it where somehow, some way that data will get released.
I mean, I hope it happens. But I don't know of a plan of it happening.
In this next clip, I was talking with Nicholas Weaver, who's a cybersecurity guy from Berkeley, who's always a lot of fun to talk to. And he has gotten into making drones. And it's a really interesting time to be in the drone industry because there's so much technology now that makes it easy to create these things. I mean, if you were a hobbyist, you actually could be doing some of this yourself at home. And so sometimes on my bonus podcast, what I do is I get a little more technical, get into some of the aspects of this that maybe not everybody would be interested in, but I thought my patrons might be interested. So this is an example of how we can get a little bit more technical in the bonus podcast about the main subject that we covered in the regular interview. So here's a snippet from the bonus content for episode 360. What about other types of autonomous drones? I mean, they've got the robo-dogs from... What was the
Boston
company?
Dynamics and
Boston Dynamics.
Cheap knockoffs now. So the robo-dogs...
I've seen some with guns on them.
Yes. So the Marines did a test of a robo-dog with a with a anti-tank launcher on it. Basically, that it could walk around, put it into a braced position and launch. The ones that I think are most interesting on the aerial drones are actually the fixed wings, so more conventional aircraft. And the reason why that is because of efficiency. That a aircraft is really a device for moving air downwards to push itself up.
Right.
It's pushing off the air. And the momentum that you get pushed off is mv. But the energy it takes to generate that momentum is nv squared. It is far more efficient to move a lot of mass a little bit than a little mass at high velocity. Quadcopters are moving a little mass at high velocity, the air that's just going through the propellers. A fixed wing is moving a lot of mass at low velocity, all the air that's being pushed down by the wing. And so, as a consequence, a fixed-wing aircraft is basically an order of magnitude better in terms of endurance than a quadcopter, because it's so much more efficient. And then you get into a sailplane, which is like 3 orders of magnitude at this point. Going with fixed-wing designs means you have to go all in on autonomy because they're harder to control. They don't hover. But it gives you so much more endurance. And there's plenty of designs that will give you a fixed wing that can go VTOL, so like a tail stand. So you have 2 props on a fixed wing aircraft where the prop wash ends up going over the flaps. So that actually allows you to do a VTOL fixed wing. So In VTOL mode, you can use the thrust of the two props to handle roll, and then pitch and yaw by directing the airflow through over the fins. And that's sufficient for you to take off and land, but then in normal flight, you're a fixed wing with a nice wing, and you get the good efficiency. And so I'm thinking over the next few years, you're going to see a lot more fixed wings in the prosumer and the professional space, just because they're so much better on the efficiency.
Well, also, and I think they've probably done with those predators and things like that, some of the bigger drones. You could actually have them just loiter, right? Like a shark, they have to keep moving, but they could do a tight circle, or something like that, as opposed to hovering.
Yeah. And in fact, like helicopters actually are less efficient in hover than in forward flight. And so that's why when the cops are running their police helicopter over a location, they aren't hovering it, they're circling.
What about water drones? Either submersible or a surface. Is that a thing?
Yes. And so there's sort of two lines. You've got the water drones tend to be optimized for long endurance, like days, weeks, months, because they're being used for like ocean sampling and sensor packages in the ocean and the like. And you've got basically three strains on that. You've got sailboats, basically autonomous sailboards. So basically a windsurfer with computer control on it and solar panels. Ukraine has been doing these jet ski based things that are literally a jet ski strapped to a bomb to go take out Russian ships. Elon Musk was notorious for disrupting one of these by saying, no, you can't use Starlink. And then there are these what are known as gliders. So in the ocean, an ocean glider basically has a ballast tank, and it can change its buoyancy slightly to be slightly buoyant or slightly negative buoyant. And then it has wings. And so how the sea gliders work is they start on the surface, they sink slightly, and because they have wings, the sinking is not straight down, but translated into forward momentum. And so they can glide a long way. And then they expel a little of the ballast and go back forward because now they're floating upwards and gliding forwards. And this gets you a very slow drone. That's like 5 knots kind of thing, 10 knots. Not a very fast drone, but this gets you so much efficiency that you're talking cross the ocean's level of endurance out of a 5-meter drone.
All right, next up, I had a chance to talk with Kate Black, who is a HIPAA specialist. That would be healthcare data here in the U.S. And I wanted to know, as a regular everyday person, how can I look at a web portal or an app or basically any place where I'm about to be giving health information, someplace asking for my health information? How do I know if I can trust it? And unfortunately, the answer wasn't terribly reassuring, but here it is. And what do you think about? I mean, I want to push back a little bit on something you said in the regular interview. You said basically, your bottom line is do your research before you sign up for anything. I don't think the average person can do it. I'm smart. I've been following privacy stuff for a long time. You are too, I'm sure. Do you feel that you could read? I mean, you can't read the privacy. They're too long. They're too vague. How, as an individual, how do I tell my mom to do her research and only sign up for things that she trusts? I don't know that that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the space of healthcare, in the context of health services, you have a little bit more tools in your toolbox to make that decision and determination. You can tell pretty easily if a organization is subject to HIPAA. So if I'm trying to choose between 2 telehealth services and one of them complies with HIPAA and one of them doesn't, choose the HIPAA compliant one. Is that a regulated badge or thing that they can declare? Is that what do I look for? Usually you'll look for a notice of privacy practices. If you see a badge that says HIPAA compliant, it generally doesn't mean anything. And the HHS FTC world has said, that's a bad thing. Don't do that. But one hallmark is that they have a HIPAA specific privacy notice. And if they have that notice, then it's much more likely that they certainly are covered entities. Some covered entities don't post that publicly, but you could contact them and ask them for it. And I think that's kind of the major telltale sign in the healthcare space. Outside of healthcare and like the broader world of consumer products and services, obviously that doesn't work. And I agree with you that it's not reasonable or time efficient to try to research every product, tool, and service you're using. And I think there, unfortunately, you have to be a pretty sophisticated user to implement the types of personal controls to protect your own data online.
I interviewed Jason Edison over the summer, and this was episode 386. He is from Intel Techniques. He works with Michael Bazzell, who you may have heard of, who wrote the book Extreme Privacy. And Jason is an OSINT, or an open source intelligence expert. And he works with law enforcement agencies during the day to try to find people using open source information. And his other job, working with Michael Bazzell, is helping other people protect their information so maybe they can't be found, or in some cases kind of, drop off the grid. And so in my regular episodes, I usually try to focus on the things that most average everyday people would be interested in. And so oftentimes in the bonus content, I will go off and talk about more esoteric things. And since I was talking with Jason, I had to ask, what is it like when you're working with celebrities or famous people, politicians, whoever, who want to go off the grid or maybe fix their online reputation by deleting information or want to zealously guard their privacy? And along the way, he talks about the practical side of covert surveillance tech and just some priceless stories. Tell us how things get weird, how you go through the looking glass when you start talking about somebody who's a high-level celebrity, obviously without giving names, but in fact, it sounds like you wouldn't know them anyway. But what happens when you get to that level? How do things get weird when you're trying to do privacy or maybe fix somebody's reputation or something?
Yeah. And I will give the caveat. So my partner Michael handles almost all of our high-level cases. I have done quite a bit of dignitary protection and quite a bit of privacy work for government officials, elected officials, and so on. So I can speak to this a little bit. So across the board, our biggest challenge is unreasonable expectations, right? And part of the thing is even rich people don't want to spend, $8,000 to get their privacy cleaned up. And everyone thinks it should cost $200 because of things like LifeLock, right? Well, sorry, I can't relocate you and create trusts and do all of these things for $200. So unreasonable expectations. Also, people not understanding that a big piece of this is them changing behavior, right? I can do all sorts of magic in the background to try and clear your trails, but if you are just going to continue living your same lifestyle, it's going to all my work's going to be undone, right? So, for example, we have clients come in that want to become quote unquote invisible. First thing we say is, okay, when are you moving? And they're like, well, I'm not moving. Well, if you live in the US and you have owned a home or even rented a home and you're not willing to move, there's only so much we can do, right? And another thing will be like people will reach out to us and they're like, I'm really into privacy and I want to do this thing, but we see that they're contacting us from a Gmail address. And so the first thing we do is say, here's instructions on going out and getting a Proton Mail account, because if we're going to talk to you about cleaning up your privacy, we can't have Google scraping all of our conversations. Right. And so there's a big educational component there. And then the other thing I'll just throw out is this is probably a little more common on the public official side that I deal with. I can't tell you the number of times where people want us to do bug sweeps. And like the old school, like, I think someone's listening in, sweep my office for bugs. And we laugh about it because behind the scenes, we're like, people are not John McClaning through your vents anymore, right? So one thing I figured out to do, though, is you need to meet the expectation, right? And so we have some people who are like, they don't feel like we did a good job unless we search for bugs. So what we do is what I call ghost busting. So I have a bunch of bug sweeping equipment that has flashing lights on it. We go through, we wave it around. The more lights, the better.
Right. I'm picturing picture things from Ghostbusters that Egon had in his hands, right, with the little antennas that go up. Yeah, the
little meter. And I was even tempted because I make costumes for my kids. There's one year we all went as Ghostbusters. I was tempted to bring in like a proton pack. So we call that ghost busting. We go in, we flash the lights around, wave the wands around. Then I spend about 10 minutes going through doing physical exams of the room, which is going to find really anything, because I know from doing electronic surveillance, any sort of camera or listening device needs two things. It needs a data egress point and it needs power, right? So when you're having installed these devices for years, I know what to look for. And I also know no one climbs through vents to do them anymore. But here's the big takeaway. While I'm in their office, right, their big fancy office, I'm looking around and I'm like, they want us looking for bugs, but they've got an insecure smart TV with a camera in it and a microphone. They've got a router that I'm sure has never had the firmware updated. And then I'll do a wireless survey and I'll look, and we've got 285 wireless devices that overlap with this space, and probably 80% of which are not secure. And this is not even including the devices that this person has, their admin has, and from personal experience, most leaks are humans, right? Like we like to think that it's someone tapped us by listening through the wall, but it's usually someone who was in the meeting, right? So
Yes.
I just think that's real interesting, that human nature of, so sometimes what we do, we'll kind of do this little performative magic show to meet their expectation, and then in the background do the real work that needs to be done. But it's all about kind of that facade, so because otherwise sometimes they don't feel like we did the full good job.
Sure.
So, but I mean, these days, you know, and most of your audience knows what the real threat is. We all have all these interconnected devices that we're putting in our spaces. No one has to
Right.
crawl in to install something.
Right.
They're so much more likely to compromise the stuff that we installed.
Right. It's the classic pogo. We have met the enemy and he is us.
Yes.
All right. Next up, this is from my conversation with Jack Daniel, a wonderful man. He is one of the co-founders of the B-Side security conferences that were kind of an adjunct to DEF CON and Black Hat, but have now taken over the planet. They're all over the place now. In fact, if you want to try to find a local hacker conference, that is the easiest way to go. Look for a B-Sides conference near you, and there's probably one within a couple hours. Anyway, back in episode 388, when I talked to Jack, and for the bonus content, Jack is a Renaissance man, as we like to say. He has many interests outside of cybersecurity. He likes to fix up classic Jeeps, for example, but he is also a luthier, which is somebody who makes guitars. And in this snippet, we're going to talk a little bit about the Punk Rock Museum in Las Vegas and an amazing electric ukulele that he made for a friend of his who runs a tiki bar, Frank's Tiki Bar in Vegas. And by the way, if you ever go, and it's a fun place to go, there's a carved mask of Jack Daniel on the wall. As you walk in, it's just around to the right, which is just amazing. But this story is funny, and toward the end, it gets a little technical into guitar stuff, but hang with it. The ending is well worth it.
So I have a dear friend, Mello. For those that know Vegas, Frankie's Tiki Room, Mello was at Double Down for years, and then when they opened Frankie's, started there. He's native Hawaiian, but he's also heavily into punk. Last summer, when I was there, he and his wife took me over to the Punk Museum, which, if you're into music at all, you should go to the Punk Museum. If you're into punk, you absolutely should go. I was never really into punk. I completely understand the ethos. I just wish they had talent. Let's see how many people we can offend there. I'm reminded of the Onion quip, 8-year-old punk prodigy already can't play guitar. But they have an amazing collection, and there's an interesting punk nexus in Vegas and history in Vegas. They have an amazing collection. It doesn't all fit in the thing. They just opened a year ago in April, so it's only been open a little over a year. And even not being hardcore into punk, I walked around and repeatedly said, "How did you get that? How did you get that? How did you get that?" And unfortunately, with the punk lifestyle being what it is, the answer was often a variation of, well, after he died, his mom asked if we wanted it. Well, after he died, his wife asked if we wanted it, but they have some really cool stuff, and it's organized largely geographically, somewhat historically. It's a place with multiple rooms, and so it's a great place. They have a bar they call Triple Down, which is inspired by Double Down. Double Down Double Down has been in Vegas for 30 years. It's a 24-hour-a-day punk bar that never closes. Hasn't closed in almost 30 years, and they've been part of the punk scene forever, and it's phenomenal. And so Moss, who co-owns that with Chris, has provided a lot of information and insight. So anyway, there's a punk bar at the Punk Rock Museum, and it's great. And if you are a musician, especially if you're into punk, there is a room where they have equipment that is playable. You just have to ask, and you can pick up an axe, you can pick up a guitar or a bass, or I think there's at least one keyboard, and there's some amps and other equipment there. And if you ask, they will get you set up, and you can play with the bones of dinosaurs, and it is awesome.
Anyway, if you go into a regular guitar shop, there's signs on the wall that says you can't play Stairway to Heaven, you can't play Smoke on the Water. What's the equivalent sign for this place?
I don't know. You can't
Anarchy
play
in the UK,
right? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, probably. But anyway, so long story short, Mello also had some. His wife passed away, unfortunately, about the same time my wife did. And even though we live thousands of miles apart, so we really bonded. And like I've played bartender for him at B-Sides Vegas. He's come over with the people. And so anyway, we just become really good friends. And so after I saw him last year and he was talking about his ukulele, I realized I needed to make him a punk ukulele. and I realized, well, if it's punk, it's got to be solid body. So I took a chunk of 2x12 dimensional lumber, carved a body out of it. I made it Les Paul shape because of the significance of the Les Paul Jr. in punk. But I had to make it far oversized because to fit two humbuckers on required it. And I know a junior should only have one bridge pickup, but I wanted to go completely over the top. So I got a built neck from CB Giddy, who does a lot of cigar box guitar stuff. So I got a built tenor uke neck, and they have somebody that hand winds humbuckers for 4-string electrics, and so I got a pair of their hand wound humbuckers and traditional single volume, single tone knob with a 3-way switch for the 2 pickups. But then just to be completely over the top and inappropriate, it's got a Bigsby B5 tremolo on it. So it is a solid body electric punk guitar with a crude black and white wash paint job, punk skull inlays, hand-turned aluminum plates for the switch mounting and the pot mounting. And it's absolutely sick. And it's strung with the thinnest electric guitar strings that Ball makes. It's a 7 high string, and I did it as a low G instead of a high G, the traditional ukulele tuning. And it absolutely shreds. But it is a short neck. It has no bridge. The Bigsby is the bridge. There wasn't room to put a roller bridge in to make it work. And so it's skinny. And so I won't say it's going to stay in tune really well, but it's punk, right? So, being in tune is not that big a deal. So that's the punk. I delivered that in April.
Did you name it?
It's the Les Pukulele. So it starts out Les Paul and ends up in ukulele and works the word puke into it because punk and bartender. Yes. So the Les Pukulele, yeah. So if you're in Vegas, check out Frankie's.
In episode 396, I had a chance to talk with the 2 researchers behind the TunnelVision hack, Dani Cronce and Lizzie Moratti, and they were a lot of fun to talk to. It was an amazing discussion about how VPNs actually work and a lot of shady marketing around the capabilities of VPNs, being a silver bullet for security and privacy. But for my bonus questions, oftentimes what I will ask people is, what is your origin story? How did you get to where you are today? How did you start doing this? And this often leads to some very interesting stories. And this was no exception. What's your origin story? How did you get to where you are today? A lot of people have very interesting paths to their current careers. Dani, let's start with you.
So, when I think I was like 10 or 12 or something, I was on YouTube, and they had like one of those YouTube tutorial videos with like 009 soundscape in the background, that like the default music for Windows or for YouTube. and they're like, this is how you can hack your friend. And they like made like a shortcut and they put shutdown in it, and you could send them like a shortcut with an icon on it. And I sent my friend one that looked like it was Warcraft 3. It's a video game. And I sent it to him over like Yahoo Messenger or AIM or something. And he clicked it and he's like, it didn't do anything. And then like 20 seconds later is like, so-and-so is offline. And I just started like becoming a nuisance. And I was like, back in the day, SMT, we didn't have what is it? Is it SPF? We didn't have like, it can't be SPF. That's like
that's sunscreen.
Anyway,
I know what you're looking for, but
yeah, that's sunscreen. We didn't have email protections, right? And so like you could send it from just like any domain.
Like DKIM and yes, DKIM and some of those other Mm-hmm.
And I was like sending people emails from like I was using Google. Yeah, I was spoofing, and I was sending it from federal places just to play with people. And then one day it stopped working, and so I deleted all of my accounts and everything, and like I went into like full lockdown mode. And then that just kind of became I was doing that, and I learned how to program when I was 14, and it just became I didn't know what to do in college. And then I'm like, I guess I should just do this because I'm good at it.
That's awesome. All right, Lizzie, what about yourself?
Yeah, I had quite a different path, but at some point, like when I was like probably like 12, 15 or whatever, I came across Hack This Site. And it was basically like this little like web challenge thing for like, can you hack this site? And like I would look up tutorials for it, and I was like, oh, this is really fun. And then I stopped doing it at some point, and then I went to like high school or whatever, and I took a computers class, and I was like, wow, this is really fun, and I don't know what I'm going to do once I graduate, and now the panic's starting to set in. So I might as well go to like college for computer science. And then somewhere along the way I realized like, oh, I could actually do security. So that kind of became my focus, was like, I'm going to go into like cybersecurity. And I got to about my junior year in university, and then I realized that student loans are a thing that I'm going to have to pay back. And I was taking out private loans because I couldn't get like scholarships, and like my family wasn't able to like help me at that point. So I had private loans that had like 15% interest, and I was like, all right, time to look for internships and things like that so I can like hit the ground running. And I interviewed at this place called Rhino Security Labs, and they needed a project manager, and I was like, I'm the team captain for this CTF team that I'm working on. And they gave me a full job offer as a project manager. So I actually dropped out of university for computer science to become a project manager at this pen testing startup firm. And I did that for a couple of years before I moved over to a different company. And then I decided, man, I really want to go back to like doing technical things. How do I do that? So I studied like on my weekends and like off time, and eventually I convinced enough people that I was good at what I could do, and I deserved like a junior position as a pen tester. And that was Leviathan. And since then it's been like 2.5 years now since I made that switch. And I was basically just trying to soak up as much information as I possibly could from people like Dani, who had been doing it since they were like 14.
All right. Well, now I want to know, how would you recommend people, first of all, recognize that they might have an interest and or innate ability to do these kind of things? And then how would you recommend, despite how you got there, how would you guys recommend that they follow that path?
I guess like from my perspective, the thing that I would look for is like, how intensely curious are you about like how things work? Because if you're curious about things that aren't necessarily like how they work, but you're just like, oh, this is really cool and I want to build with it, that's one thing. But if you're like, how does this actually work and why does it work this way? And you start like kind of like asking yourself questions like that a lot, you probably already are doing this without like realizing it. Like there's hackers that have nothing to do with computers. There's people who like know how people work, right? And like they social engineer people. There's also like people who are just building really cool things that are like out of the box, but it comes from like this deep understanding of like how things work and why they work that way. So if you're the type of person asking those questions, and you know if you are, then I would highly recommend like looking at some of like these small challenges just to kind of like test the water. They call them like CTFs.
Capture the flag, yes.
Yeah, capture the flag. And if you like get really drawn into that, then you're going to have a really fun time professionally. That being said, if you're not somebody who is okay with not knowing the answers, you might want to stop, because once you start getting in like deep enough, there's not answers, and it gets like really complicated, and it can be pretty frustrating. So that's how I would determine if I would want to seriously consider like hacking as a profession.
Dani, what about you?
I agreed with what she said, honestly. That's how I kind of came across it, which was like, this is interesting. I get to like understand how like all the underpinnings work. For me too, it's about building stuff, not just breaking it, which is why I got into programming immediately. I built all of my own. When I was 14, all of my hacker tools were like mine. And so like I had my own TCP scanner, I had my own Flutter, I had my own web browser I built. I had things that would construct SQL injections and JavaScript injections and like everything. I'm like, I've got to build my tools for me. And so I've kind of been on like this weird, like, I like to build and I want to make cool things, but I also really want to understand how everything works at a really precise point. And so the kind of insight that I give to like a lot of our clients is I'm like, hey, this is how you built this. This is how I would build this. There's a problem that you didn't look into. Like one time they had the distributed system and I was like, oh, you didn't use the correct locking, and I can create a race condition. And here's how I can create this race condition and like over, and like, they're like, oh God, like you can like do all this. I'm like, yeah. And other hackers wouldn't find that necessarily, because like, I think being a good hacker is being a good engineer. Like it's knowing how everything works and is knowing better ways to do something. Because if you just tell them, oh, your stuff's broken, and they're like, okay, well, how do I fix it? And you're like, I don't know.
I think another skill set that's also really important, and like the professional like pen testing work, is, do you like explaining things? Because if you hate explaining things and writing stuff down, then you're going to have a really bad time, because most of this stuff, like, I'm going to call them like normal people, don't really have to think about or touch. And if you don't like explaining concepts, that's going to be a hard sell.
Of course, I had to pull a snippet from episode 400, my quad centennial or quad pod centennial. Anyway, 400th episode. I interviewed Bruce Schneier, who after my browbeating into coming for the 100th episode, agreed to come back for every 100th episode, which he probably never thought he'd see 200, let alone 400, has been back for every 100th episode. So this was the 400th episode, and in the bonus podcast, we had so much to talk about. Sometimes I actually just have to have overflow. This would have been nice to have in the original interview, but I have to keep the regular episodes to a certain time length. So in this clip, I ask a couple questions. First of all, are we putting too much pressure on the average user to basically not screw up? Are we putting too much onus on them for security? And then the flip side is it technically feasible to make computers and devices that are secure by default? How much responsibility should the average consumer or end user bear for security and privacy? Because it seems like we lean on them a lot. Instead of blaming the victims, which we seem to do often, like you shouldn't have clicked that link, you shouldn't have opened that attachment, you should have had better passwords. Wouldn't it be much more effective if manufacturers and service providers were private and secure by design?
Yes, but that's again the game the manufacturers and the companies are telling you. If I can convince you it is a user problem, then you're not going to try to make me do better. It's no different from pollution or plastics recycling. The industry convinced everyone that they should recycle. So no one looked at the bad manufacturing processes. I mean, blaming the user, I think, is actually harmful. I mean, you should have known the aircraft wasn't safe. You shouldn't have flown. You should have known that, drug you bought at the drugstore would kill you. You shouldn't have bought it. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of regulation is I don't have to worry when I get on an airplane. I don't even think about it. I know the plane is safe. Not because the market decided that it's cheaper to keep me alive than to kill me, but because the government has mandated safe aircraft. Now, we can argue about Boeing and regulatory capture and how it doesn't work, but
Yeah.
in theory, that's the idea. And blaming the user responsibility tends to cover for bad design.
Yeah.
It's your fault. You shouldn't have clicked on that link. Why is it that clicking on a link could be damaging? Like,
Right.
that's a terrible system.
Right.
You shouldn't have like put that USB stick in your computer. Like, it's a USB stick. What should I do with it? No, it was Microsoft's fault that it had auto run as a default.
Yes.
So generally, pushing something on the user covers for bad engineering, and it shouldn't. We want people to be able to browse the internet freely clicking on links wherever they see them, because that's a better internet. I want you to be able to go into a drugstore and buy anything off the counter, and I'm pretty sure it won't kill you. I can't say you need a pharmacology degree to go into a drugstore. That's stupid.
So is that technically feasible? Like, I find that Apple and to a lesser extent Microsoft over the years have tightened down their operating system and made, they put in sandboxing and they've put in app permissions and things like that. It seems like they're slowly dialing things down to make it harder for people to hurt themselves. Can we get there that way?
Of course. It's expensive. Nobody wants to do it. But imagine, there was a free-for-all pharmaceutical industry like there was in the previous century, and lots of snake oil, people are dying, drugs don't work, and then you come in and say, I want to regulate the hell out of you. Right? They'd all scream, it's too expensive. We'll go out of business. You can't do it. We have to be able to, kill our customers. Don't be ridiculous. That's where we are today. So yes, you can force companies to create safe and secure products. We force automobile manufacturers. We force airplane manufacturers. We force the pharmaceutical industry. We force restaurants to follow health codes. More recently, we forced the financial industry to have safer products. This is what government does. And all industries hate it, and they will fight it tooth and nail, and they will lie about everything to get it not to happen. But it is how we get safety and security in our society. I can't name one industry that has become safe and secure without being forced by the government.
Right. Yeah, sadly.
But it's necessarily sadly, the market doesn't reward it. It's just a reality. Markets can't do everything. That's okay. No tool can do everything. But in the U.S., we've sort of been taught not to think about market failures, not to believe in market failures. There's this myth that markets solve everything, and they in fact don't.
Yeah, it's certainly not without transparency. And that's why I think some of these things for nutrition labels and things that at least give consumers some visibility into the relative level of security and privacy of two products.
Yeah, but as long as they're actionable. And also, nutrition labels have been hacked enormously. There's a lot of obfuscation in those labels. A lot of things they're basically lying about. So it's hard to get those labels right. Because again, right, the industry doesn't want those labels.
But you got to try, and then you fix it over time, right? I mean, these things evolve, right?
Indeed, you have to start.
So I've collected a lot of really great extra bonus content, and it's become quite an amazing perk for my patrons, I think. And I love doing the interviews anyway, so just having more of an opportunity to ask more questions is a big boon for me personally as well. So anyway, for my last clip, and it's certainly last but not least, is from my recent interview with Carissa Véliz, the author of the amazing book, Privacy is Power. And she is a philosophy professor, and so brings a very interesting and I think illuminating view of privacy. And I wanted to ask her whether or not she thought that philosophy, in particular things like ethics, should be taught to STEM majors, engineering in particular. For example, just because I can invent something and can do something doesn't mean I should. I mean, look at AI. As you may or may not know, Alfred Nobel of Nobel Peace Prize fame was actually the inventor of dynamite. And I had that thought in my mind as she relayed a particular anecdote about the inventor of the Kalashnikov rifle. As I went through engineering, I used to lament the fact that a lot of engineering training doesn't really focus anything on soft skills. At least when I did it back at Purdue, they didn't. Written and oral communications, collaboration, even like just human-centric design. It was like, does it work? It was like the driving criteria. But in more recent years, and maybe this is just because I'm older, but I found myself wishing that technologists were required to take classes in ethics and civics and history. We haven't seemed to learn that just because you can do something, that you shouldn't do something. as a philosopher, I'm curious what your take on that is. So should this be a required part of STEM education curriculums? And how else might we incorporate more, humanist considerations in our high-tech culture?
I think that it should definitely be included as a necessary component, because it's important for people to think about what do they want to contribute in their lives. People are going to devote about 80,000 hours to their careers. And when I teach students in physics, in mathematics, in computer science, in engineering, I talk to them about inventors who have regretted their inventions, to kind of inspire them not to be that person that at the end of your life you wish you hadn't done what you did.
What were some of those stories? Like, what are some of the ones you relate in that case?
Maybe my favorite story is the one about Kalashnikov. He invented the Kalashnikov.
The AK-47.
Exactly, the AK-47. And at the end of his life, he writes this very touching letter to his priest. And he asks whether he's responsible for all the deaths of women and children that have been committed with his invention. And when he invented the AK-47, he thought he was doing it for a just cause and for a just war. And it never occurred to him that it was going to be such an effective machine, that it was going to be used by lots of other people in lots of other wars, and not just wars. So that's one example. And to put it in perspective, I think we can learn a lot from medical ethics and the way it has developed. So if you went to the doctor in the 1950s, no one would have studied medical ethics, and you would have been subjected to things that today we consider completely and absolutely savage.
I didn't realize it was that much of a recent development.
Very recent development. And in a matter of like 15 years, now you can't go to a hospital that doesn't have an ethics committee, and you can't meet a doctor who hasn't had at least one course in bioethics and in medical ethics. And within that, there are also kind of soft skills about bedside manners and all kinds of things that really weren't part of medicine. So I think in the same way, in 15 years' time, you won't be able to encounter an engineer who doesn't know at least the basics of technology ethics, AI ethics, and so on.
Have you seen, and because I've been out of the academic world for so long now, I mean, it's been 30 years since I was in college. Is there a movement among STEM education curriculum at the big universities to include ethics? Is that a thing that's happening? For sure. And one of the interesting things about it is that many times it's come from students asking that they want to learn ethics, which is quite inspiring. So I often teach ethics to computer scientists, to physicists, to mathematicians, to engineers, to people in the business school, to policymakers. It's great. I love that kind of variety. So there you go. There's a little bit of a taste of what some of my bonus Q&A sounds like, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And if you do decide to become a patron at some point, you will get access to all of that. I've got over, I think, 150 episodes now, if you include the Merlin's Musing stuff. And once again, I'll just put this out there. If you want to help me reach more people, this episode and the previous best of would be a great one to share with other people on social media. But anyway, let's wrap it up for this week. I hope everybody has a very happy and safe New Year's. Be on the lookout for that listener survey. And I've got a lot of great interviews in the pipeline, so if you have not already, subscribe and then you won't miss any of that. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. Happy New Year. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.